Afternoon and welcome everyone. This is Mayor Schulman with the Hartford Foundation's Nonprofit Support Program. Joining me today are the NSP team. Even though you can't see them, they're there. Melanie Tavares, our director, Amy Studwell, our senior officer, and Betsy Johnson and Monica Kelly. And as always, a special thanks to our wonderful support team of Betsy and Monica for all their hard work behind the scenes managing the logistics for today's session. It's great to have you all with us today. We will have a somewhat smaller turnout for today's webinar due to a lot of folks taking some much deserved vacation time prior to the 4th of July holiday. So I hope you all have a great 4th as well. The good news about a somewhat smaller group is that there'll be a greater opportunity for all of you who want to ask questions, and we encourage that. So as always, we are happy to offer this webinar free of charge. And the only thing that we ask in return is that you please complete the survey that you'll receive immediately following the webinar. As always, we really value your thoughts on the session, as well as your suggestions on what other programs you're interested in having us offer in the coming months. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Lindsay Bialco, whom some of you may recognize from NSP's Strategic Technology Program, which Lindsay has been leading for us for over 15 years. Lindsay is the founder of her consulting firm, which is called Toolkit Consulting. Her current and her past clients include the Microsoft Corporation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, TechSoup, Idealist.org, the Hartford Foundation, and the NPower Network, to name just a few. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Lindsay.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor, and welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you here today for a session that we're calling Making the Most of Working from Home, using technology effectively to be productive, collaborative, and secure, and what I'm calling a hybrid workplace. So many of us have been now working from home for quite some time. Some of you have probably already begun to go back to the office, or maybe for some of you, you never actually fully left the office because you were considered essential and may have had some presence all along. But nonetheless, we have been adjusting to the path forward to a new way of working. And I think as we're all starting to see with the news headlines that we're seeing the last couple of weeks, that there's a good chance that many of us will continue to either work from home or work in what I'll call a hybrid environment, part virtual, part in the office for the foreseeable future. So as we have gotten more comfortable with that over the last 3 months or so, just wanted to revisit what are some of the best practices or things that we can use to really take our collaboration, our productivity, and our security to the next level while we work from home. So before we begin, let me start with a simple poll, and I'm actually going to put the poll up on your screen here in just one moment so you can actually reply via your Zoom screen. So make sure that you have pop-ups enabled. Hopefully now you're seeing a poll on your screen. What best describes your experience with Zoom webinars? Do you participate in them regularly, occasionally, or you've never used it? And let's see, we have 42 attendees here. And so I see that 32 of 42 have voted. So if you haven't yet voted, find that poll somewhere on your screen, monitor 1 or monitor 2, and go ahead and tell me what your comfort level is with Zoom. And I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to get our final votes in. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I had a couple of final last votes there. So I'll share the results with you now, and hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing, which is 86% of you are participating in them regularly, which is not surprising given that what we were just talking about. We are 3 months into work from home here. Nobody is saying that they've never used it. And I'd just like to pause and reflect on how different these answers might have been had we done this poll on March 1st instead of on June 30th, which I think is what today is. You know, this has really forced a really quick digital transformation, and many of us who maybe only occasionally used virtual collaboration tools before, video conferencing tools, things like Zoom or Skype or Google Hangouts, we're using them pretty much all the time now. And so really seeing that in these poll results, and you all are quite comfortable. So let me stop sharing those results, close out the poll for right now, and go ahead and move us along. So you're all experts. Just a couple of Zoom housekeeping tips for the way that we're going to be using Zoom today. You all, good point, Adam. Sorry, seeing Adam's chat saying one can't answer never used it if one is on this call. That is very good. It was a bit of a circular reference, I suppose. A quick bit of housekeeping on Zoom, even though you're all pros, just to let you know how we're going to be using it on today's call. You are all in forced mute, so you won't be able to verbalize your questions or your comments with each other. Just a little bit of a safety play given the size of the webinar. However, that does not mean that you can't speak up. I encourage you to use chat to talk with one another. So you can chat to all panelists or attendees, or depending on what version of Zoom you're running, this might say chat to everyone. This is what I'd like you to use to share your answers to questions that I ask you that aren't multiple choice polls. It's what I'd love for you to use to share ideas and insights with your fellow attendees, because especially with this topic, there's so much that we can learn from each other. And even if you're not in the room and you can't say these things verbally, please do feel free to answer questions I ask, or just share reflections and observations as we go of tools you're using, tips you found helpful, etc. So chat is going to be for attendee to attendee participation. We'll use Q&A for you to raise up questions to me. So if you've got questions specifically to the things that I'm speaking about and you want to flag them for me to talk to, please use the Q&A tool, that button on the bottom of your screen there. Mayor will be helping me keep an eye on the Q&A, and we'll be pausing at 3 key junctures as we go to respond to those Q&As, one for each section of the training that we're doing. Okay, so with that, let's move on and actually start diving into our content today. And again, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Just a tiny bit of background about me. For those of you that have done a training with me before, welcome back, and glad to have you, even if I can't really see you. One thing that you might know about me is that I have worked remotely since 2010. Full-time, working from home, working remotely as part of organizations and as part of teams, sometimes as a consultant, sometimes leading disparate teams that are around the world. And so I've been in this space for a while and trying to make sense of how to make the most of working from home and ensure that I'm being productive, and that particularly when I'm working as part of an organization staff, that I also feel integrated and part of that team. So I'll share some of that experience with you today to add on to the experience that you all bring. Many of you might also have worked from home, at least occasionally, long before this. And even if not, you've certainly learned a lot in the last 3 months, I am sure. As I always talk about technology, I want to make sure to kind of ground it in the so what, or why technology matters. And so just wanted to start that even now in this really, unprecedented time where many of our organizations are facing challenges unlike those that we've seen before. Yes, it is a really difficult time to focus on technology, and it is also a critical time to focus on technology. Technology is the very tool that is enabling us, or did enable us, to keep our staff working during stay-at-home orders, to keep delivering on mission, and to keep offering critical services to the people that we need to reach and to the causes that we serve, as well as trying to raise essential funds to be able to keep our doors open. So it can be a lifeline in a time of crisis. Really, we can focus on technology helping us do one of 4 things: optimize our operations, so make sure that things inside of our firewalls are working really well, we're streamlined, we're effective, we can still meet the demand, even if demand is increased, but we've really got efficient processes and policies in place to ensure our operations are effective. We can also use technology to help empower our people, our staff, ourselves, to ensure that we're able to do our best work, that we have access to the tools that we need to be effective. And both of those things are really about us transforming our organizations. Again, I kind of said behind the firewall. We also can use technology to transform our beneficiaries, our mission, or our cause. So to help us engage our stakeholders and community, or to keep our stakeholders and community engaged, and also to help us transform our products and services, which is something that many of you have probably been forced to do at least to some extent, during the COVID pandemic and during stay-at-home orders. And maybe some of those changes are actually going to stay in place even as we start to re-enter the workforce, as restrictions start to ease, at least for now, and as some of you may be returning to the office. But really the focus of today's session is to get good at these two bottom items on this chart, optimizing our operations and empower our people to do our best work while working remotely or virtually, whether that's full-time or part-time, so that you can be most effective in engaging your stakeholders and community, in running your business, and in hopefully being able to be focused on transforming your services or the products that you're able to offer in this new normal. The other bit of context that I want to share, and you did a great job speaking to this already in the chat responses that you shared as we were getting warmed up here, is that this is hard, but there is some upside. And if we can survive this crisis, your organization can come out the other side stronger, more resilient, better prepared, and perhaps with some long-term changes to how you work that will serve your organization really well, even in the long term, post-wave one, post-wave two, post-vaccine, where again, we're being forced to digitally transform the way that we work faster than we would have ever before. And this offers our organizations a chance to rework our processes and our service delivery. Maybe, we already know that we've done things like enabling remote work faster than we might have before, moving things to the cloud, streamlining our processes, shifting to things like digital intake, digital fundraising, or marketing automation. So there are definitely some benefits to that forced digital transformation that you're perhaps already thinking about, keeping aspects of that for the long term in this kind of hybrid that we're going to be in for at least the next year, and then maybe even beyond. In terms of benefits of remote work, many of you had some things to talk about here. It forced us to better use the technology we have available, Eric shared. Many of you mentioned the no commute time. Julie said can concentrate on work better with no distractions. Deborah mentioned streamlining grant processes, so having a chance to revisit that. Lower carbon footprint, so there definitely are some benefits, and I'm just going to emphasize again that I think many of you talked about that saved time commuting, and Mary Jane, welcome back, glad to have you again. Some of this content will look familiar to you from our AMI session together, but enjoying walks is what Mary Jane said with some of that newfound time. So there are some benefits to remote work, many of which you've already commented on. Besides just those benefits to you as an individual employee, there's of course benefits to our organizations. There can be reduced operating costs and rent overhead if we move to a model where some staff are always remote or where we're doing shared office space. So maybe some people are in the office while others are at home, and switch, meaning you could have reduced need for such large office space. It can be a benefit for your staff. Many of you commented on the benefits that you're perceiving yourselves. So for those of you that are managing teams, for those of you that are ED, CEOs, or directors of your organizations, many staff view this as a benefit, not all, but many, and it can help with staff retention. And the third one I'll mention here is when it comes time when you're able to, again, hire for open positions, having the ability to successfully integrate and include remote workers, virtual staffers, can let you cast a broader hiring net for your open positions to help ensure that you're getting the right talent and the right fit that you need for your organization, even if they may not be in regular commuting distance from your Hartford area office. I think we're all realizing that we're also building resilience and readiness for, I hate to say it, but for next time, where maybe like next time is a month from now, or maybe it's this fall as we enter wave 2, or, maybe it's the next snowstorm or the next, Hurricane Sandy or something like that. We hate to talk about things like that, knock on wood, but this is helping you, or it should be helping your organizations get the policies and practices in place so that you are ready when inevitably the next moment comes when maybe you can't get to the office for a reason as simple as a snowstorm or, as complicated as wave 2 of the pandemic. You can flip that remote switch a little bit faster and more seamlessly the next time. So as we go through today, take the time to think about what you've done and learned and how you might be able to improve this. Many of us aren't even fully back to the office yet, but the next time that everybody's got to be ready to work from home. And last and certainly not least, this is an opportunity to reassess your priorities as an organization and to really be smart about what is the key value that you're offering the community, what are the absolute things that you need to prioritize, and maybe even to look at how you can add new value during this time. So for many of you that are here from education organizations, your new value might be offering distance learning to students in an after school or an out of school environment while you know that parents are still having to work and the kids are not able to go to school, or in some cases to childcare or to summer camps or to the extracurriculars that they might normally. It could be helping people get the skills, the digital skills that they need to get back to work, because so many people have been displaced by this pandemic and are going to need to learn new skills to return to what will be an even more digital economy. So I want to move on, but just an opportunity to look at some of the upside and some of the ways that we can, as organizations, reflect on this moment. So I'd love to have you just chat in now. When we started, you were chatting in a benefit that you've realized of working from home. If you can, just take a minute now, and I'd love for you to think and chat about what's been a silver lining for your organization about going virtual. Besides, yeah, I don't have to commute, or I'm more productive at home. Is there an organizational silver lining that you've realized? Go ahead and take a moment and chat that into everybody to share some of your insights there. So I see Jane has put in more focus on work projects and planning. I'll give you a moment for a couple of others to put in. What's been the silver lining for your organization of going virtual? Lastly, as those are coming in, I want to remind you that, of course, today we're going to be talking about making the most of working from home, and a big part of that is getting you set up with the technology tools and the setup that you need to be productive. But remember that technology is rarely, if ever, the full problem or the full solution. So as we talk about tactics, solutions, and approaches today, keep that in mind, that technology is not the silver bullet on its own, because good solutions require, yes, a technology solution that reasonably meets most of our needs. They rarely can meet every single one of our needs, but we need a tech solution that meets most of our needs. We also need people who are using that technology to make it work and have the training to actually make the most of it. So just because we have these tools doesn't mean we feel like we're using them to their greatest extent and capability. So us having the training and capacity to use these tools to the fullest is critical to these things succeeding. And then lastly, we need the culture to support the adoption of these tools and practices, the right policies and processes in place to govern their use, right? So just because we have, Google Suite for nonprofits in place doesn't mean that we've created the culture and the policies that everybody's sharing all their files there. So good technology cannot help us overcome bad practice. So we need to keep all three of these things in mind as we're looking at the solutions and tools available to you today. It's not just technology, it's technology, people in training, culture, policy, and process. So with that lens in mind, let's continue on. In the meantime, thanks to those of you that are sharing some of the silver linings of your organizations going remote. You all can read these. Oh, actually, you can't all read these because some of these are coming to all panelists. Make sure that you're sharing to all panelists and attendees when you send in these chats like this. And wow, we've got a lot of really great things in here, some of which you can see, some of which you may not see. So Jennifer says, really started to use cloud capacity, allowed more time for planning, wider reach for our meetings and training events. Let me see if there's any others that just came to panelists. More ownership of your schedule and timing, a bit more flexibility in the workday, super important. being able to focus on the macro view and think broadly about new initiatives. And then one more that I'll share is Adam shared discovering things that we can do remotely, which we did not do previously. And there's more that are in here. Feel free to keep them coming. Do remember to share your chats to all panelists and attendees so that everybody, if you're willing, can see what you're learning and your ideas and your insights as well. But these are fantastic and great to see some of the silver lining that you're all realizing through this kind of forced transition into remote work a bit faster than any of us was really planning. Love it. Okay, one more poll, and then we're going to start talking a little bit more about your technology setup to support remote work. But before I do, let me switch to polling question 2 here, and I'd like to hear more from you about your status with return to the workplace. I keep asking this on every webinar we do to understand what's the reality for you all out there. Are you still working from home full-time? Have you started returning to the office? Or are you waiting until later to return to the office? And the results here I'll share with you in a moment, always super interesting. So take a moment, respond to the poll that's on your screen. Give you about 15 seconds to find that poll and share your input. We have 72%, 75% of our precincts reporting. See if we can increase our voter turnout. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm closing it. All right, let's share. So super interesting to see that, again, the majority of you are still waiting until later to return to your workplace. And then the next greatest area is that you were considered essential, so you always had at least some staff in the workplace. So you can see the results here, and a few of you are just starting to return to the workplace. So thank you so much for that input, clearly, and that's what you're here today. Many of you are going to continue to work from home in full or in part until later, until it feels like things are a little bit safer to return to the workplace. So all the more important for us to make sure that we're doing our best. And again, I'll just say that the trend that we're seeing is that even over the next year, what we'll continue to see is what we call a hybrid workplace, where organizations are working part virtual, maybe part in the office, some employees from home, some employees in the office, a rotating schedule. And so continuing to be able to work now with maybe not a fully virtual or remote team, but now with that mixed team is going to be really important. Okay, so with that, let's dive into our key content for today. So the basics for remote work, including infrastructure and security. After this section, I'll pause for questions, then we'll talk about thriving, managing, and collaborating with remote or virtual teams. And then I'll share some resources with you for further learning and give you some more time for Q&A at the end. For those of you, I'm not carefully monitoring the Q&A, but if anybody's wondering, we are recording this session, so you'll be able to access the recording if you want to share it with coworkers or others on your team, or if you have a conflict. Secondarily, we'll also be sharing these slides with you, so more information on that to come, but know that, yep, we're recording, and also we'll share the slides with you. Okay, last poll for a little bit, I swear, but just helps me to be more relevant and helps you to reflect and also see the trends from others in the group, if we can share a little bit of information between us. So one more poll for right now, and then we'll share a little bit more. So for others to see, as well as me, what method, to the best of your knowledge, has your organization primarily used to enable employees to access mission-critical files and applications remotely? What method have you used to enable access? And these choices are a bit longer, so I'm going to stop talking, let you read, and let you respond to this poll, and then I'll share so you all can see. And share your primary approach. So if one's really dominant, go ahead and share the one that's really been dominant for you. %70 voted. I'll just give a few more minutes for others to vote. Sorry, a few more seconds. Whoa. And I'll close the poll in 5, 2, 1. Okay, 77% voting. Not bad. Let's share these results so you can see how you compare to others on this call. To the other 44 people, or the, let's see, I think it was 37 people who voted in this one. So the majority of you said your critical business files and software were already in the cloud, or you quickly moved them there, so you've been accessing critical business files and critical software in the cloud, and we'll talk more about what that might look like in a minute. Some of you are using a virtual private network or a VPN to tunnel into your office servers and systems, so a slightly more technical approach where you're having to connect to that VPN to actually get into a server that might sit in your office. Some of you, I guess it's about the same amount between VPN and this, are using remote desktop services, tools like LogMeIn or TeamViewer to access computers or a computer in the office. A lot of times we're seeing this be used because there's one computer maybe in the office that has QuickBooks on it, and you need to use remote desktop services to get in and get to that financial software on the computer. And then a few of you are doing a combination of the above. Okay, so very interesting. A lot of parity in the bottom choices here, with a majority of you saying you quickly moved your files and key software into the cloud and have been accessing them there. All right, so let's move on and talk a little bit more about what the ideal setup is here, and how it might compare to what you've got set up. So really the best scenario, if it's not already set up, although for many of you it is to have a cloud productivity suite set up so that you can get to both your productivity tools, but also your mission critical files using shared cloud file storage. So these are tools like Office 365 or Microsoft 365, which includes Teams, depending on what version you've gotten. And Teams is their, we'll talk more about that, but that's their IM, their presence, their conference calling, and their collaboration tool. Some of you might have Google Suite or G Suite for nonprofits. Tools like this, like Office 365, Microsoft 365, or G Suite, are compliant with all federal security requirements, and they employ an army of security professionals. So in terms of security, these are top choices. There are also systems like Box and Dropbox, but there are two important things to keep in mind here. Number one is Box and Dropbox are great for file sharing and file storage, but they don't include all those productivity tools that Office and Google do in order to enable you to do the Word documents or the word processing, the spreadsheets, the presentations, etc. So Box and Dropbox definitely solve for file sharing and collaboration, but they don't include the productivity tools. However, you can link them to your Office 365 or G Suite accounts if need be. Actually, particularly Box, you can do that with Office 365. I am not as sure about Dropbox, to enable that full suite of productivity. The other thing that's really important with all of these is to make sure, and this is particularly true with Box and Dropbox, that you are not using personal versions or not having employees use personal versions of these, but that you actually have an organization subscription. And when people are putting files in there and sharing them, they haven't set up their own, they're not using their own Dropbox, their own Box, or even their own OneDrive, which is the Microsoft tool, or their own Google Drive, but rather they're actually using the organization version. It's an account that's been set up in your organization's name, and everybody's sharing and using that same location. And that's one thing that we've seen quite a bit of that needs to be corrected if it was set up in a hurry, is to make sure that it's not Lindsay using her OneDrive and Amy using hers and Mayor using hers, and we're just sending links back and forth, but we all have an organizational home base that we're using. What's beautiful, as you know, if you're using these tools, is it just makes virtual collaboration so much easier. They automatically save a version of every edit you make to every document, provided it's saved in the cloud, so that it can easily be restored. They allow for collaborative editing and joint markup of documents. They let you send a link to the document instead of a copy, which is important more now than ever, so we're not just emailing versions and versions and versions of documents to one another and causing craziness because we have multiple copies of a document in various states of edit. and then nobody needs to manually merge edited versions. So for those of you that are already on these tools, hopefully you're using those in that way to fully realize those benefits. Again, if you're not sure, if you're in Office 365, Teams, or SharePoint, those are the group file sharing sites there. In Office 365, it's Teams or SharePoint are the group file sharing sites. OneDrive is individual. In G Suite, it's Teams Drive is the shared storage. Google Drive is individual. What we want to avoid is you as an employee or you as a director having your employees host or save your organization's files on their personal device, on a local hard drive. You also don't want them hosting or holding those files on a personal Dropbox or Google Drive for a number of reasons, including security, ownership, data privacy, continuity planning, and I could go on. So we really want to make sure that when we're enabling these these tools, that we're not setting up personal versions, and that we have the policy and the culture in place that employees understand, that we understand why I, Lindsay, employee of Toolkit Consulting, do not want to be taking on the responsibility or accountability for hosting client files, donor files, volunteer files, any mission critical business files on my personal accounts, whether those are local or in the cloud. So that's an area to make sure you are looking at. For those of you that don't have that, excuse me, ideal setup of the Cloud Productivity Suite, including the shared cloud file storage, you may be using those virtual private networks or the remote desktop service. I don't think we need to talk much about those because the fact of the matter is at this point you've already gotten those set up. And if you don't already have them set up, I would encourage you to talk with your organizations about if you can get free licenses to things like Office 365 or Google Suite to move the entire productivity suite to the cloud. And again, maybe some of you might need to use a mixed model where for some access you might have to VPN in or remote desktop into a particular software like QuickBooks that you maybe don't have a cloud version of and you're not able to pay for or quickly make that transition to the cloud version of. But in general, ideally, you're moving to having this hosted cloud productivity suite approach and only using VPN or RDS, remote desktop services, as needed to access certain tools. Okay. I'm going to go ahead. Sorry, I had to find my advanced button there for a minute. So let's also talk about access to computers. Mercifully, I'm not going to make you take another poll right now, but actually, let's just do a quick hand raise. For those of you that look at your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, can you just quickly raise your hand if in this time you are using a personal laptop or computer? You have to use a personal laptop or computer to do your work for your organization while you're virtual, while you're remote. Raise your hand. At the bottom of your screen, there's a little raise hand button, or somewhere on your screen, there's a raise hand button. Raise your hand if you have to use your personal computer, laptop, or otherwise to do your work for your organization. Okay. I see about 10 people with their hands raised, so that's good. Oops, 11. That means that, well, at least there's 12. We're climbing. It's not a majority of you that are using your personal computers, which is good. I'm going to go ahead and lower all hands. Thank you for that. Because ideally, we do want our employees, ourselves, to be using org-issued computers with the Cloud Productivity Suite that we've already talked about, and importantly, with antivirus. If you are using your own, or you are an ED or a director and you have staff that are using your own computer, it is critical to make sure, if they haven't already during this time, that they apply pending updates to operating systems, to Office or productivity software, to the browsers that they use, to Java and Flash and Adobe. Because if you're using your personal computer or your staff are using a personal computer, that's a risk. You don't know what state those computers are in, whether all those updates or security patches have been done, whether there's antivirus running. And so you want to make sure that you are taking these actions yourself to check to make sure that you have antivirus and that you haven't been holding off on doing any updates to these key pieces of software or applications. That includes running virus definition updates daily. If you're wondering how you're going to get virus definition updates, if it's not an org computer and it's not being provided to you by your organization, for Microsoft and Office 365 users, Windows Defender is a great free solution. It comes actually built into Windows 10, so if you were to do a search on your Windows 10 computer for Windows Defender, it's already there, and you just have to make sure that it's actually running and that you've set it to update your virus definitions daily. But there are other powerful solutions as well, including Bitdefender and Norton LifeLock, both of which are available through TechSoup for reduced costs if you can get it through your nonprofit. But the key is that we want to make sure that you, if on all of your computers, whether they're personal or otherwise, during this time for virtual work, when people aren't in the office, we've got to make sure that we've set these updates to run so that we're not putting our files, our data at undue risk. I think we already talked about not storing files, data, passwords on personal machines. The other thing for anybody that's working from home, whether you're on your own computer or an org-issued computer, is please, please, please make sure, if it's not already, that your home Wi-Fi network, which I'm assuming many of us use, maybe you're connected, but many of us are on Wi-Fi, it's got to be secure. So it should require a password for you to log on. Once you've entered that password once, as you know, it automatically logs you back in, but you should not be using an open Wi-Fi connection when you're doing organization business, because that's a vulnerability to your organization's security. The last thing to be thinking about here is, if you haven't already, if you didn't have one in place already, or in the last 3 months you haven't put one in place, now is the time to implement a telework policy that puts all of this into practice. And here's an example of a sample telework policy that's available at Prepare, Respond, Serve online, preparerespondserve.org. There's another telework sample policy available at TechSoup. So if you don't already have a telework policy in place, this protects you, the employee. It protects your organization, and these are going to be especially important as we start to move back to work. Again, even if that's partially back to work, here's the way that you, directors, managers of teams, EDs, can set expectations for what is the expectation for remote work, what equipment you're providing, what equipment you're not providing, what work hours are expected, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see the sample here. You can get this at TechSoup.org or preparerespondserve.org. Both have samples. And again, I will be sending you these slides, or we'll be posting these slides, I should say, after the session. So you can grab those links if you didn't capture them quickly while we were talking here. The other thing, as an organization leader, if you've got budget, not that we have a lot of spare budget right now, but now's the time to be thinking about, when you do procure new computers, start thinking about procuring laptops instead of desktops. These days, laptop computers can be just as powerful as desktops, and then that way we're prepared for the next time this happens, or we're prepared for employees to always work from home, whatever the situation may be. TechSoup has a refurbished computer program, and they've got many laptops that are available in the $200 to $500 range, $200 to $500 range, that come with Windows 10, Windows Defender, a 1-year warranty. You would have to order Office or use Google Suite to get on those, but it can be an affordable option in a time when resources are tight, to make sure that your employees, especially those that are working from home on their own computers, have the tools that they need. And a great comment from the Opera Theater of Connecticut saying screen size can be a problem. True, but you can also always connect to an external monitor. And a monitor on its own can be much cheaper. And usually with a desktop computer, you have to get a monitor anyway. And so screen size is a problem with laptops. Absolutely. Right now, I've got my laptop at home plugged into a secondary monitor. And believe it or not, this monitor is older than dirt. So I even had to get an adapter on Amazon to be able to connect it. But it still works, and it gives me 2 screens, and including one bigger screen, because it's a great point. Whoever shared that comment from the Opera Theater of Connecticut. Security best practices. So we've started to talk a little bit about this, but want to just make sure that you all are following security best practices as you continue to work from home to protect yourself, to protect your organizations, and to protect your clients, donors, or constituents whose data you may be handling or who you may be providing services to while you work from home. So the most important thing to know at this time is that the majority of cyber attacks these days start with an email. So training yourself or training your staff to recognize cyber attacks is critical. Hacking is no longer really about breaking into systems. It's about manipulating people. That's super important, so I'm going to say it again. Hacking is less about somebody having the technical skills to break into systems. These days, it's about them manipulating people, sharing information that they know about people to convince them to accidentally provide access to an email password, to a login, or something like that. So getting training to recognize phishing and other forms of cyber attack is super important. And security suites, training tools like KnowBe4 or PhishMe or Wombat all provide easy to digest video training and testing to help you test yourself or to help you test your staff to see how savvy they are about recognizing a potential phishing or cyber attack. KnowBe4 has training available for TechSoup. It's not ridiculously cheap, but if you are from a large organization, you have a lot of staff, and you see that as a real potential weakness, knowing that the majority of cyber attacks start with a phishing email or something like that, it may be worth taking a look at KnowBe4 through TechSoup. And that's actually, let me just quickly type it in the chat here so you can see how it's spelled because it's a little bit funny. Okay, there it is. And there are other tools like this as well. As I said, PhishMe with PH and Wombat, W-O-M-B-A-T. But really, we've got to make sure that our staff are trained and ourselves are trained to not get duped into thinking that it's our boss sending that email and sharing bank account information, et cetera. We've known for years that passwords are important, but more and more, the best practices that are being recommended to us by the Computer Security Associations are actually to use passphrases, not just passwords, but long passphrases are really important because there's no such thing as a password that can't be hacked, and the longer the password, the harder to crack. So for example, my leopard has fleas, or my dog Spot likes bones, 1, 2, 3 is something like 23 characters long, and it might be easier to remember than something that's a mix of characters, numbers, letters, that's not actually a phrase. So start thinking about using passphrases instead of just passwords. And of course, all of the same stuff applies and is even more important when you're working from home about not using the same password everywhere. The other thing is that you really only need the new best practices here say, the recommendations are, you really only need to change a password if you know it's been compromised or if you suspect it's been compromised. We used to have to just change our passwords every 90 days sometimes because our organizations required that. And more we realize that unless we suspect that that passphrase has been compromised, we don't necessarily need to change it. Okay, two most important things saved for last. Multi-factor authentication, MFA. Sometimes used to be called two-factor authentication, but more and more now we're calling it multi-factor authentication. Many of you probably already have this set up because your organization set it up on some of your Office 365 or some of your other cloud-based accounts, or maybe you've set it up on your own. But multi-factor authentication is when, instead of your password alone getting you into any of these tools, it's your password and then they send you the text. And you have to enter the code from the text, or it's your password and they send you an email and you have to enter the code from the email. It's some second level of authentication because, again, there's no such thing as a password that can't be hacked. And recent studies show that multi-factor authentication can actually prevent something like 99% of attempts to hack a system. So from everything from Amazon to your credit card to your Office 365 or Google Suite, wherever feasible, enable multi-factor authentication or talk to your tech volunteer or your tech staff about enabling multi-factor authentication. It's the best protection. And then lastly, you probably want to start considering using a password manager if you aren't already. If you're already using a password manager out there, go ahead and text in or chat in the name of the password manager that you use to everybody on the line, all panelists and attendees. A single sign-on or a password manager like LastPass, KeepPass, 1Password, they can help eliminate the need to memorize multiple passwords. It's one password, and then the password manager stores all of your passwords. So of course, the first question we all want to ask, myself included, was, well then, doesn't that mean that I'm vulnerable because if somebody knows that one password, then they know them all? These are actually shown to be hacked less. There are very few recent cases of these password managers being hacked, particularly if you're using the paid versions versus the free. And you can also set up multi-factor authentication, which we already talked about. So I see Jennifer is using Keychain. We've got a couple of people that are using LastPass. Some of them may not work with particular systems. That may be true. But if you can at least get it so that you're not separately managing, right now, we might have notebooks full of our passwords. We might have a document full of our passwords that's not safe. We might have Post-it notes full of our different passwords. Or worse, we're using the same password everywhere, which is a major risk. So really the conventional thinking is that using a password manager is one of the safest things, or single sign-on is one of the safest things that we can do to eliminate not only the need to memorize multiple passwords, but probably most importantly for most of us, that need that we're keeping a single document or piece of paper somewhere that has all of our passwords on it, which is a major risk. So to wrap up this section, and then I'm going to pause for all of your questions, this is just a summary of many of the things that we've talked about. Now is the time for you to make sure that your organization is getting telework policies or bring your own device policies in place if people are working on their own. And there's a link to a BYO policy there. It sounds like many of you have already put your mission critical files in the cloud. Make sure that those aren't on personal cloud storage folders, but instead shared organizational ones. Start thinking about replacing desktops in the future with laptops as computers crash and you're forced to replace them. Implement MFA wherever possible, and if you can, get training to recognize cyber attacks or phishing attacks. So I hope a lot of rich content. I also know I went through a lot during that section, so I'm going to pause there, turn it over to Mayor, and see what questions have come in about the many different strategies, tips, and tools we've just talked about in section number 1.
Sure, Lindsay. So Ree asks, we currently have E3 subscriptions for Office 365. Someone suggested we save the monthly fee by going with the free nonprofit version. What would we lose if we did this?
It's a great question, Ree, and I don't remember it off the top of my head. It changes a little bit. I know that there's E1, E3, and E5 through Office 365. There is some difference between them. Whether you're going to miss it, I am not sure, but if you go to Microsoft.com/nonprofit, or if you go to the TechSoup.org page, you should be able to see a comparison between E1, E3, and E5 to see if the things that you would lose in that change of subscription are important to you or not. And I apologize, I just don't have that information handy in my head, but I know that you can find that comparison between E1, E3, E5 of Office 365 online. And a good starting place might be Microsoft.com/nonprofit.
Okay, and Ree has one other question, but if others have questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A. So Ree's other question is, since we moved from our remote desktop system to Office 365 online, we've been having trouble sending links to documents on our SharePoint. What's the best way to do that?
Can you read me that question one more time, Mayor?
Yeah.
I want to make sure I'm answering relevantly.
Sure. Since we moved from our remote desktop system to Office 365 online, we've been having trouble sending links to documents on our SharePoint. What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, again, this is a hard question to answer, Ree, without looking particularly at your setup. It could be about permissions and the groups and permission access that you have enabled in your SharePoint. Honestly, if you're on Office 365 and you have access, therefore, to Microsoft Teams, what I have found is more user-friendly than using the kind of older version of SharePoint or that SharePoint interface is actually to use Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams has basically got SharePoint in the back, but once you set up a team, you can actually share files right within Teams. Behind the scenes, it is hosted in SharePoint, but in terms of sharing files, you can put them right into that team site. You can right-click and either include them in a Teams message to the channel or in Teams message directly to one another, or just have a shared channel for, let's say, fundraising campaign, and everybody that's in that channel has access to those documents. But you should be able to, provided you've got your permissions and your group set up properly, easily share those documents and those permissions via links. So you might want to talk to whoever helped you set that up to see if maybe there's a permission issue that needs to be changed in the settings or in the groups that you've got powering that. But where possible, add people to a Teams channel and start sharing files there. It becomes a really nice user-friendly front end to SharePoint that I think makes it a little bit easier to share files that way.
And Lindsay, I think your presentation was so incredibly clear. There are no more questions right now.
Okay, I am seeing one question in the chat from Carol. She's asking about Google Suite for Nonprofit. Is there a cost? What about a domain name? Is there a cost? Setting up Gmail for everyone in my office, what's the cost? The answer is, Carol, that if you're an approved nonprofit, there's a certain number of seats that you can get for free from Google or G Suite for Nonprofit. If you are an eligible nonprofit by their standards, it used to, I feel like, be a limit of 10, but those of you who are on G Suite, if you could chat in to all panelists and attendees, and maybe you know the most current limit that you can share with Carol. But yeah, there is a free, Google Suite will donate a certain number of seats to your organization, and G Suite includes the ability to set up your email, add a domain name, so it's at Toolkit Consulting, for example. It gives you access to all of the basic productivity tools, and right now, I know that until September 30th, they're also offering the ability for you to use the tool that used to be known as Google Hangouts. It's now called Google Meet. For a while, it was called Google Hangouts Meet. Really confusing. They're now making that available for free until September 30th so that you could broadcast live to do like big online events, broadcast, or to host online meetings with up to 250 people. And that's free until September 30th. But if somebody else knows the current seat limit for G Suite for Nonprofit to be free, chat it into the all panelists and attendees, and we'll get Carol's question answered. If not, Carol, I can certainly follow up with that quickly. But again, if you were to go to google.org/nonprofit, you can find out pretty quickly if there's a seat limit and what it is. But if you're an eligible nonprofit, they will let you set up most of the basic tools for free. And it may just be limited based on the number of staff, and after that you might have to pay, although it could just be unlimited. Any other questions that have come in, Mayor, or are we good to move on?
We're good to move on.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about managing and collaborating successfully on virtual teams. So of course, I'm going to do another poll to start us off, make sure that you're still out there and to learn from you. I'm sorry if I forgot to stop sharing results the last time, so you might have had a polling window somewhere around you the whole time. Okay, this is a variation on our previous poll, but, and some of you are asking questions about this, so I know that you're starting to use these, but I want to know which of these tools is your organization using as its cloud-based or core productivity suite? Which of these tools? So we already talked a little bit about some of this. Many of you are using Office 365. Some are using Google Suite. Anybody using Slack? So go ahead and share your response to this poll so we can see what is it that everyone in the Hartford greater area is using. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to find this poll and reply. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and close the polling and share the results with you. Sorry for my clicking. Okay, so you can see the large majority of you. I'm surprised by this. Now, not everybody voted, but I think we were like at 68% or something like that. The large majority of you, 20 or 65%, are using Microsoft Office 365, including Microsoft Teams. Or lately, this might be Microsoft 365 as they've changed the product a little bit to include Windows 10 as well. I'm surprised to see nobody's using Slack. Alicia, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Alicia, asked if Asana fit into this category. Asana is more of a project management tool, but I think you could use it to manage some aspects of productivity. It tends to be more focused on project management. And I see from Adam, they're using a combination of Dropbox and Office 365, and Doug at the Windsor Historical Society they've got a small staff, and so they're really just using email. But so you can see that a great majority of you are using Office 365, and just a couple of folks either using a combination like those I just talked about, or using the Google Suite for nonprofits. So thank you for that input, really helpful to know what folks are using today. So I want to start by reminding that remote access, the things that we talked about in section 1, are really just the first step. In a virtual world, email and phone really leave us lacking. And if we can supplement email and phone, we can help our organizations, ourselves, and our staff be more productive, feel more included and connected, which we know is really important as we continue to work remotely more than we have ever in the past. So video is definitely important, but one thing I will say is that you don't have to have video on for every meeting, but I think it can be really important to have video on for at least some meetings, and ideally there's one meeting where it's a full staff meeting and everybody has video on, and you get that personal connection, you get that sense of inclusion, you get that sense of a connectedness, and everybody can kind of really feel that they're part of the broader organization and aware of what's going on. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But do I think you need to have video on for every single meeting? I do not. But it is important to turn the video on sometimes, and I'm guessing that many of you have been doing that. The other thing, and many of you that are using Office 365 with Teams may have been finding, or for those of you that are using Google, or this is included in some other tools as well, having a tool that helps you do presence and messaging or chat can really improve productivity and keep staff connected. So presence means you've got a tool like Skype or Zoom or Teams or Google Suite that shows when people are online and when people are off. And the screenshot that you're seeing in front of you right now is from Microsoft Teams. And this shows that the people who are green are online and connected. The people who are purple are out of office. The people who are red are maybe in a meeting. They're maybe busy. But especially for those of you that are managing people remotely, these presence tools can really be helpful for kind of understanding when people are online, when you can ask them questions, etc. Again, many of you may have been using this and also finding that these IMs or these chats, which you can do directly with one coworker or with a group of coworkers, really replaces the walk down the hallway, poke your head in somebody's office and ask a question kind of a modality. So if you're also working remotely, you can't just say to Doug, like, oh, hey, Doug, did you get a chance to do that thing yet that I asked you about yesterday? IM tools or direct messaging tools like this, these chatting tools, can really replace that so that not everything has to be an email, because we are already overwhelmed by our emails. And if every single little question goes into email now, we're just never going to feel like we can be caught up with our email inboxes. And so using these chat tools to replace some of those poke my head in your office door questions can be really helpful, provided, however, that you establish norms around when you send an email, when you pick up the phone and call, and when you might use a chat or a message like this versus when you have a meeting. So it's important for your organization to establish what are the norms and the do's and don'ts or the etiquette for when it's an email, when it's a chat, when it's a meeting, when it's a phone call, and use all of those tools at your disposal. And then, and really teams like, or tools like Teams and Slack can pull all these things into one place and to help you to do that. Now, the last slide was a screenshot of Teams. It sounds like nobody's using Slack, although Slack does make itself available for free for nonprofits. And a free version of its standard plan is available to organizations with fewer than 250 employees. So if you're not using already Google Suite or Microsoft Office 365, Slack could be a popular tool. It's known to be very user-friendly. It allows you to set up these group messages and presence along with channels to centralize discussions. The only thing it doesn't include is, the Word, the spreadsheets, the presentation tools, but can be really effective as a free add-on if the piece that you're missing is the chats, the channels for collaboration and for presence in your office. So definitely think about, one, do you already have one of these tools? And two, how are you using it? Because ideally, you'd be using, those of you that are using Microsoft Office 365 or G Suite, you'd be using it not just for the productivity software and email, but also for the messaging, the video calls and meetings that are integrated, the file sharing, the automated backup, which is great. Or again, if you're not using those tools, you can use things like Slack and Zoom, which have these channels to help you set up functional teams or projects like the examples that you see here. You can also set up org-wide channels for announcements related to how you're operating during COVID-19, or for, like, a lot of organizations now will set up a fun channel or a just for fun or a water cooler channel where you can share some of the stuff that you might have shared in the break room, in the lunchroom, at the water cooler, a little bit more informally to keep some culture and some sense of togetherness going at your organizations, even while you're all working apart. And so you can see these channels here. These are all very work focused, but many times you'll see a water cooler channel and people will say, I'm getting a puppy, which everybody seems to be doing during pandemic. And they'll share a picture of their puppy so that you still have a little bit of a dedicated space for some of that fun chatter that you might have otherwise done. I want to share just maybe a fun little break, a video that helps show us a little bit what our reality might be like as we're working from home. I'm not sure how many
So
of you
I think we just need to think through some of the logistics there.
We're trying to get them to let us know so we can plan.
Very critical time for us.
I'm working too.
90% of the calls, Ellis thinks that she's also part of the call.
Starting next week.
Hey guys.
I'm so exhausted.
This is modern parenting.
Okay, so maybe not just to single out the moms. I think for many of us that spend pets in the background, dads, all of us, we are working in totally new ways. And sometimes I think we've all gotten to the point where it doesn't surprise us at all to get on a Zoom call with our coworkers and see or hear a child or a dog or a lawnmower in the background. In some ways, it's been really freeing that we have brought less formality to this, but it also can be challenging. So one of the biggest misconceptions for those of you that are managing remote, virtual, or hybrid teams is that this requires an entirely different skill set, and that is not true. So many of the skills that you already have that you use to manage your people, you can still use. That said, you are going to need to keep putting in extra effort to cultivate a positive team dynamic, to ensure your workers feel, your staff, your people feel connected to other colleagues, and things like that. So let's take a look at a few of the tactics that you might be using if you're out there. Whoops, sorry. I think I went one slide too many. If you're out there and you're trying to actually manage teams. So many people, when they're moving to a virtual environment, are struggling to understand, how do I know if my team is working? And what I would say to that is, how do you know if they're working when they're at the office? right? I mean, I'm guessing that you don't just spend all your time looking over their shoulders and seeing what it is that they're doing on their computers. So really, I think we have to challenge ourselves, and I'm sure you're already doing this, to find new ways to measure the work, but not the time. And as you saw in one of the chats at the very start of the call, some people actually feel more productive when they're working off-site because, yes, there are distractions at home for many of us. There are also distractions in the office. And there are studies that show that in the office, we basically spend about 11 minutes on a project before we're interrupted. And that after we're interrupted, it generally takes, on average, about 23 minutes to get back to the focus that we were in before. So interruptions can bother us whether we're at home or at the office. So let's just be really clear on what the priorities are and make sure that we're setting metrics that measure the work and not the time, so that we have ways to communicate with our staff about what work is actually getting done, how we'll know that work is getting done. Also keeping in mind that what's really productive structure for one employee may not be productive for a different employee. And so we've got to help our employees set up the most productive environment for them. And that might mean setting up different hours of availability, depending on whether an employee has kids or if an employee is in a multi-generational household and is having to take care of an aging parent or grandparent, or if there's somebody in the house that's sick. So we do definitely need to be mindful of that work-life balance, lead by example. You might have heard the expression that we might be in the same storm, but we could be in a different boat. So there's an increased need for grace. I've seen a lot of organizations that are setting up what they call core availability hours. Those are like the office hours. If you think of the academic model where we're all going to be online between 10 and noon, like that's the expectation. But if some of you need to be off from 8 to 9 because you're homeschooling or you're getting kids to some kind of childcare, or some of you need to be offline, you know, right from 3 to 5 when kids are getting home, or when again there's some kind of expectation for work from home, or you're balancing with a spouse. So you might want to establish core availability hours when we know that everybody each day or on these days will be available from 10 to noon, so that we can have our meetings, we can ask each other questions, we can find each other on our IM tools or our Teams or Slack or Google Suite. But outside of that, create some flexibility for people that need to deal with a different schedule because of childcare or otherwise. And use things like email signatures or autoresponders to signal what hours you're working or what hours you're available to check email or to do meetings. And if you might be having to work from 7 to 9 p.m. every night because that's when your kids go to bed and that's when you can get back on email. So I think we are needing to be more adaptable to these shifted flex schedules to help people be able to manage all their priorities without like really losing their sense of normalcy. But to do that and to have that work well, we have to be really clear on what are the priorities and how are we measuring when the work gets done. So something to think about there. And I'm going to go ahead and do one final poll. This is our 5th and final poll of the day. You might be relieved to know, but just curious to hear how you're doing your virtual work going forward. I think I have an answer or an idea of this based on your answer to the very first poll question that we did, but which of these best describes your situations with regards to virtual work going forward? This is for you as an individual. So are you going to be working remotely for the foreseeable future? Are you hybrid? Are you already or will be back in the office full-time soon? Okay, and I'm going to give you 5 more seconds to respond to this poll. 5, 4. And I'm closing with 70%, and I'll share the results. So actually, I'm a little surprised by this, that most of you are actually already working in that hybrid model, which is really interesting. And hopefully helps give you the best of both worlds to some extent. Some of you still working remotely full time, so that's interesting as well. But really, we're seeing most people who are doing some kind of hybrid, some days in the office and some days remote, which, you know, again, for many of you may actually be the ideal scenario, because you've got some days where you can focus in the office and some days where you can skip that commute and can really be productive and effective from home. So again, I can share some tips for a work from home environment, but rather than just rattle off a bunch, I'd love to ask you to share your tip, tool, tactic that has helped you to thrive or succeed while working from home, because I know that you've been doing this for 3 months now, many of you, and there's a lot of wisdom already in this room, so to speak. So make sure you're chatting to all panelists and attendees, and we can see each other's tips, tools, or tactics. But what's one thing, if you could share one piece of advice or one learning, one thing that's worked really well for you to help you succeed on the days that you're working from home, what is it? Okay, so I'm going to start by sharing one that Mara has already got in here, and that was that she found it can be helpful to let people know in advance that you'd like to have them have video on at an upcoming meeting. That way folks can be prepared. Yeah, so they don't feel like, oh, I can't turn my video on because my hair is a mess, or I'm in, you know, I'm in my pajamas or something like that. So that's a great one. Dedicated workspace is Deborah's suggestion. And again, please share your suggestions, your chat to all panelists and attendees. So Alicia shares that she gets ready for work in the morning, whether she's planning on leaving the house or not. Jane talks about the importance of maintaining a schedule at all times. And yet, developing a habit around that daily schedule can be really important. The Opera Theater of Connecticut shared the same. Doug is emphasizing, yes, no PJs, it's Tuesday, not Sunday. Having a shared family schedule of all events, these are fantastic. Let me just share any that only came to panelists, work specific times, and the hours for the public. Yeah, so a lot of great suggestions here. And I'm actually, it's interesting to hear how many of them are about having that fixed work schedule so that you're setting expectations with yourself, with your team, with your manager, about when you're available and when you're not. So keep those suggestions coming in as we're going, and I'll share just a couple more before we try to wrap up this section and turn it over to any other final questions that we have. The one thing that I will say is that I do think for all of you that are managers out there, scheduling and keeping your one-on-ones is probably harder now than it's ever been, but also more important now than it's ever been. Just to be checking in with your employees to help make sure that they have what they need to succeed, that you're helping them set up for success. So please do schedule and keep your regular one-on-ones. If you're a manager, set up your, whether they're weekly or bi-weekly one-on-ones with your team. Turn on the video if you can, like Mayor said, set that expectation in advance so that you have that check-in. I've also heard about many organizations that are virtual all the time, not just during this pandemic, doing a daily stand-up meeting, which is a short but very well coordinated team meeting where the whole team dials in, and these are 15 minutes or less, where everyone in the organization gets to see everyone else once a day. And again, the stand-up meeting is not new. This wasn't created, you know, just for this pandemic. And it's not even just for virtual teams, but it's the idea, it's a stand-up meeting because the idea is that it was going to be fast if everybody had to stand, and it's a full team daily check-in, and it can be really helpful for a staff that right now, like the way we're all working, is distributed and has bunches of smaller teams so that everyone can see each other across the organization, hear what others are working on, and ask for help. And you can, again, make this a habit, do it every day, but it's 15 minutes. Even large organizations are doing these in 15 minutes or less, and you're just sharing your priority for the day, what progress you've made or what roadblocks you're facing that you need help with. And also sharing if you have any capacity to be able to help other people. So these can be a really key tool to help keep people productive working from home. We talked a little bit about a healthy team culture. So just because we're working remotely doesn't mean that we can't celebrate Susie's birthday or Julie's work anniversary. So still celebrate milestones and small wins the way you might in the office. If you get that big donor check that you were waiting for, have a way of celebrating those either in the first 5 minutes of a call, on that channel that we talked about in Slack or Teams or Zoom, where you're celebrating those things. Just still creating a healthy team culture so that people don't feel like they're just on their own and working alone. And that can be really important to keeping people feeling healthy and productive as they continue to work from home or in a hybrid environment for what might be the considerable future. And I already talked a little bit about that tip, so I won't repeat it now. I will just say, and this has literally almost nothing to do with working virtually. This is just good meeting hygiene in the first place. But good meeting hygiene is even more important when you're working virtually or hybrid. So whenever you can, group your meetings together to give yourself dedicated time to focus on one activity or core deep thinking, deep work activities during the day. So this isn't always possible. To the extent that you can, take all those little 30-minute meetings that you have and try to get them together in one cluster so it's not half hour on, half hour off, half hour on, half hour off. And you feel like you never get any deep work focus time. You need that deep work focus time. So if you can, group meetings together. Do not set meetings, virtual or otherwise, without a clear goal and agenda. Invite the minimum possible number of people that you need to succeed in that meeting. Don't default to assuming that every meeting should be 30 minutes or an hour. Make the meeting as long as the meeting needs to be to cover the goal and agenda that you've set. And now here's where I will say that not all work from home tips work for everybody. So Doug, I'm going to politely disagree with you here. I've been working from home, as I said, since 2010, and I believe when I started, believe you me, every morning I got up, I got dressed like I was going to work, and that's what I did, and that's what worked. I am at a point now where I get up, and except for today, where I put on real clothes, I often dress for the walk that I'm going to take at lunch. So I put on exercise clothes. So that's one area where, you know, work from home tips are not one size fits all. Like for me, that walk is so important to my mental well-being. So when I get up in the morning, I get dressed in my exercise clothes. It helps me hold myself accountable to at some point during the day, going for that walk on my lunch break or when I have a break in between meetings or whatever that might be. Similarly, this same brain multitasking idea. When we are at our computers all the time for meetings, we're very easily tempted to multitask. It's different than being in a conference room around a table with everyone like we see in this picture. You know, we're just sitting here in front of our email. So it's so tempting to look at our email. It's so tempting to check the text messages on our phone, to look at the website. So I actually will take a lot of meetings on my phone using Teams or G Suites or Google Hangouts or dialing in or whatever it might be. And then I'll do something that's not same brain multitasking. Like I might fold the laundry. It actually allows me to be more present for the meeting because I'm not tempted to read the email, to get on a website, to read my text. And I'm doing something mindless, but away from my computer so that I can be more focused on listening and being present for that meeting. And so again, but these tips are not one size fits all. So definitely pick a few that work well for you and know that things might be different for your coworkers, but having some of those expectations in place. So again, just to recap what we've covered here, check in with your team. If you're a manager or if you're an employee, check in with your manager on how you're doing with work from home, what's working, what's not, and get really clear on what your priorities are that you're supposed to be working on and what evidence that those priorities are moving forward will look like. If you're a manager, reflect on which employees are suited to or want to continue working from home so that as you continue to play with this dynamic of some returning and some not, you can prioritize getting those back to work who are really struggling with the work from home situation. Get them back into the office sooner if they're willing and you can. And those employees who are thriving working from home, who are feeling very autonomous, very focused, very results driven, you can keep them there. And then, with everything, practice using these tools that you have available to you. So to like Ree's question, you feel like you actually can share those files that you need to share. So practice using the tools, establish norms, and that includes reassessing your meetings. How many standing meetings do you have every week? Are they still fulfilling the goals that they were originally meant to fulfill? And what are your meeting habits? How often are you multitasking during meetings and not paying attention? And if so, how valuable is that meeting to you? So there's so many different tips, and I know that you all have even more tips. Let me pause there and see what questions have come up during this section. So I'll turn it over to Mayor, and we can see if there's any questions in that Q&A manager.
Lindsay, there's one question from an anonymous attendee, and the question is, we've been advised Zoom isn't secure for video meetings. We use Teams in office, but should we be concerned about participating in Zoom meetings involving confidential matters hosted by other organizations?
That's a great question, and really this has changed very rapidly over the last 3 months. So basically, Zoom built itself on being super user-friendly and one of the easiest platforms for people, regardless of whether they're joining by phone or computer or tablet. It was really easy for people to join. And so they were overwhelmed early on in the pandemic because everybody started using Zoom. They didn't have a lot of their security defaults set up as defaults when that first started happening. They have since come under intense scrutiny. Actually, 2 months ago, they were under intense scrutiny because something started happening called Zoom bombing, where people who were uninvited to meetings were dropping in, were putting gratuitous things on the screen. However, what I can say is that to a large extent, Zoom was quite caught off guard by the increased demand for their service at the early stages of this pandemic. Their security protocols were not where they needed to be for them to be passing the security milestones that they needed, but they have changed that very quickly, releasing, I think, at least 2, if not 3 new versions of the tool, forcing those updates on their users and changing so that the default settings were that people had to have a password to join a meeting, that by default, users were not allowed to share their screens during meetings, and some of the things like that. So you'll notice that as a foundation, we're using Zoom to use meetings, but we're paying very close attention to what has changed in terms of the security protocols from Zoom and the defaults. And we also take active steps to make sure that meetings require a password, that attendees are not able to share screens unless we want them to. And so what I would say is you still probably need to be careful about sharing any confidential or autonomous data on meetings that are being recorded that might be shared outside of your organization, or sharing any data when there's attendees that are external to your organization, but that Zoom has taken a lot of measures to make sure that they are more secure, and that you as the Zoom organizer, it's different when you're not the one controlling the meeting, but that you as the Zoom organizer can make sure that things are really quite locked down and secure to make sure that you're not going to have problems with things like Zoom bombing. But I think as always, when a meeting's being recorded, if a recording's being posted, if there's potential for external uninvited participants to join a meeting, which they shouldn't be able to if you're setting passwords or you're putting people in a waiting room, but you should always just be careful about, if you're sharing confidential client data or things like that. But there are absolutely security measures that you can put in place to make sure that Zoom, Teams, and Google Hangouts, that you're taking the right precautions to make sure you're not exposing your organization or its clients to risk or a lack of data privacy. Great question. You can ask the Hartford Foundation. We were very nervous. We wanted to make sure everything was set up the first time we did a Zoom a couple of months ago, but we've learned a lot.
And no other questions in the Q&A box. If anyone else has a last question, please type it into the Q&A box.
And I'll give you a moment while you're thinking of any last questions to just share a few resources. I'm not going to read through these to you, but know that, again, you're going to get a copy of these slides. And so you'll have one nice summary slide that has the majority of the resources that I've talked about as we went. Forgive the horrible formatting here, but I wanted to make sure you had the links to be able to get to all these things, the full links. But there are some great resources out there above and beyond many of those that I've talked about today. One that I want to emphasize is that LinkedIn Learning right now, since the pandemic really hit full swing, has been making a lot of their learning paths and their courses that are normally behind their paywall available for free. So the screenshot that you're seeing here right now is a screenshot from LinkedIn Learning. It's this link here that I shared with you, the blog/LinkedIn Learning resources to help you navigate the COVID impact. So you can find for yourself or for your employees, if you still have anybody that's really still struggling with remote work or wants to learn more, this is just a small segment of what was available on this page, but they've got all kinds of free self-paced courses that are taught by, in many cases, university professors, that are video, that are interactive, to help you master time management working from home, productivity tips, making sure that you know how to use your video conferencing tools. Again, it's a long list. So there's a lot of great resources that are out there and available for you, so you can check some of these out when you get these slides. Also, many of us don't, feel like we often have a lot of time to learn about tech, but many of you talked about that saved commute time or going out for daily walks. So my favorite way to learn right now has been to listen to podcasts while I'm out for my morning walk. I consider that my commute. And oftentimes before I start my workday, I go for a walk, I listen to the news, I listen to a couple of these 10-minute daily podcasts, and it's a great way for me to kind of not sit down at my desk the moment I wake up, but do a little bit of a commute, learn some things, get the daily news, and educate myself about what's going on with technology or virtual work before I sit down and actually start my workday. A couple of these are general news resources, technology news resources. So the Marketplace Tech is by American Public Media, NPR folks. The Wall Street Journal Tech News Briefing. For a while, they were doing a daily work from home tip from one of their correspondents, which was great. And then these second ones are nonprofit focused. So SG Engaged is by the people who do Blackbaud. They have a podcast that for a while was focused on COVID-19, is now back to being more general, but great resources about, fundraising during the pandemic, how to manage engagement with your board members or your supporters during the pandemic, and using the Whole Whale as another nonprofit tech resource where they're doing great sessions on everything from what are the trends we're seeing happening during COVID to how to use Google Grants, some things that are not COVID related. So for those of you that want to keep learning but don't have a lot of time, just some resources. And again, I know I didn't spend too much time on those, but we'll send you those slides, and I hope that you will take the moment to check out some of those and see if maybe they can be part of those daily schedules and those daily habits that you mentioned were so important to your success. I know we just have a couple of minutes left, so I'll just pause one more time to see if there are any other questions that I can help address verbally before we wrap up. Any final questions, feel free to type them right into the Q&A box. Mayor, anything new?
Nope, nothing new, Lindsay.
Okay. Well, feel free to send any final questions our way, but hearing nothing so far, I just want to say thank you so much for spending 90 minutes of your maybe virtual workday with me today. I also want to say thanks again to the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving and the Nonprofit Support Program for hosting opportunities like this to help us all keep learning. And I wish you the best of luck and hope that you stay well during a continuing uncertain time and as we chart our new normal and our new path forward. And you can see my email there. If you think of any questions after today, feel free to reach out to me via email, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great rest of your day.